Hi everybody, welcome to A Course in Miracles Applied. Today's topic is called On Becoming Transparent. There are two meanings to this word, and we're gonna talk about both of them. And the first meaning you could take from the dictionary. My God, I totally forgot that word. The dictionary, and it would be defined, transparency would be defined as a material or article allowing light to pass through so that objects behind can be distinctly seen. If you take, as an example, let's see if I can get this a little darker here. If you have a block of paper and you have a light source, right? And it's a very thick block of paper, nothing can go through, so it's not transparent at all, right? If you remove most of the layers, it'll start to become transparent, right? Which means it will be able to let the light through more easily. So our process with the Course could be defined as a whole as the journey of becoming more and more transparent. That means the light, which is love, which is the right mind, will be able to shine through that material that blocks it, right? This thick cardboard that blocks it, that material. Our journey is to remove basically those layers, right? Those layers upon layers of hard material. And in the end, we will end up with a couple of papers, which then will start to have the light go through. Now, this is all a metaphor, obviously. But the transparency is the path would be from a very dense material, which we are at the beginning of our journey, to a light material that lets the light through more and more, until eventually all the layers are gone and the light can shine unobstructed. But for now, we are concerned only with those layers here, right? Those layers that make up this block to the light. Literally, it's literally a block to the light, a block to love. And the Course teaches us to, it first teaches us that we are fully identified, we as the decision maker, as the Son of God, are identified with this protective shield, right? With this thick layer. And over time, with the Course, we learn how to disengage from this seemingly protective layer, right? And if we would have a name for this layer, you might have guessed it, the name for this layer is guilt. Right? The Course talks a lot about guilt. So if we can imagine we are a container, right? Some kind of a rectangular container, or whatever shape you want. And the consistency of the container, the material the container is made of, is guilt. And we, as the Son of God, are inside that container, completely absorbed in it, right? We are at the outset of our journey 100% identified with that container, with this heavy barrier, right? We are completely identified with that container. We are kind of one with that container. There's no distinction at the beginning of our journey. And the Course slowly but surely gets us to a point where we can become aware of when we are in this container and when we're not in this container, which would be the Holy Spirit or the ego. And the Course describes in sometimes excruciating detail what it means to be in this container, right? All of our special relationships, we get upset about something in the world, our body, problems in the world at large, all stems from this belief in guilt. And that is the material out of which this container that blocks the sun or the light is made of. And we can't see it, right? We can sometimes experience it within ourselves, feelings of shame and guilt and so on. We can see it on the outside if we become aware of our projections, right? We can see our projections. If we're upset about somebody or something, that is actually, if we want to place that guilt to the outside and make sure it's away from us because we don't want to be identified with it, because we think God will kill or take the life back from the ones who have separated from him, and the ones who have separated from him are the ones that have the guilt. So we want to get rid of the guilt as much as possible, project it outward indistinctively onto everything and everybody, right? So, but we can't really see the guilt. But what we can do, so we can't see that block unless we look outward onto our projections. But there's another way of identifying this block. And we talked about that in the last segment. And this process of identification of the block is to realize that whenever we are not in complete peace, we are in this container of dense guilt material that blocks the light. So even though we can't see this guilt outside, or we might not be able to see it inside, we might be blind to it, what we can identify is if we're not at peace, right? And Jesus gives us a very good small little prayer that everybody knows. It is in chapter 5, section 7, the decision for God. And the little prayer starts with, I must have decided wrongly because I am not at peace. Right? So if I'm not at peace, I must have decided for the opposition to peace, which is the ego thought system, which in our case is that dark rectangular block that literally blocks out the light. Right? That guilt is the name that we give to that block, and we're immersed in it, completely immersed in it. So we might not be able to see that guilt, but we might become aware now that whenever we're not at peace, we must be in that place, because there is no in between, right? There is no neutral state. The Course says you have no neutral thoughts. You're either with the Holy Spirit or with the ego. There's nothing in between. So you must have decided wrongly, or I must have decided wrongly because I'm not at peace. That gets us the awareness of the block. And for me, the only purpose of the Course is for us to become aware of the block so that we can inspect it with Jesus and then decide against it. We cannot decide against something we don't know is there. Very simple, right? So there are a good amount of quotes in the Course that touch on that. And I pulled out a couple of them to make clear what that block is and what the process of becoming more transparent, what does that mean for us, right? What does it mean for us to let the light through just a little more, even though sometimes it doesn't look like it. Sometimes it looks like our path with the Course leads us straight into the block, and we're inside the block. We don't see anything else. Everything is guilt and fear, and we're ready to give up, right? But that is the work of the Course, to get to that point and get through it with Jesus and the Holy Spirit, come out on the other side. And then eventually we decide against the whole block, and the light shines unobstructed through us into the world. That's what Jesus means when he says the only responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself. Right? There is no other responsibility within this Course other than our accepting the atonement. The atonement means guilt is made up because separation is impossible, because oneness cannot be divided. So if separation is impossible, guilt is a made-up concept, which means this whole thing is made up. But we can't get to it, to that to that thought that then starts to grow within us, until we have looked at it with Jesus and say, okay, how does this look? What is this? Right? I get upset about something in the world. What is this? Where's the guilt in it? Where's the block? Right? Always ask, where is the block? And we ask Jesus for help to look at this block with us. So here are a couple of quotes that touch on that. They have different symbols, right? Jesus uses a couple of different symbols. One is he uses a mirror. In another, he uses a cloud formations. But here you go. So the first one is from chapter 14, section 9, chapter 5, as paragraph 5. It says, in this world, you can become a spotless mirror in which the holiness of your Creator shines forth from you to all around you. You can reflect heaven here, right? So he tells us it is possible to get past that block. Yet no reflections of the images of other gods must dim the mirror that would hold God's reflection in it. The other God that we are worshiping right now is guilt, right? That is the God. The head God of the opposition God to the God of love is guilt. Without guilt, there's no fear. Without fear, this world doesn't have to be, the heaviness disappears, and this heavy, thick block becomes fully transparent. Because the only thing that is inside that block that makes it heavy is guilt. That's the material out of which this block in front of the light is made. And we are fully inside that rectangular container. We're fully immersed in it, and we're in one sense, we're one with it. We completely identified with the ego thought system, which means we completely identified with the guilt, the belief in guilt, right? We are that belief in guilt. And it makes no sense to deny that. That is a fact that the Course talks about so many times. And part of our journey home is to look at that. And in looking at it, it becomes transparent. In denying it, it stays a solid block. That's the very simple process of it. So you can reflection here, you can reflect heaven here, yet no reflections of the images of other gods must dim the mirror that would hold God's reflection in it. So guilt, we cannot believe in guilt. If we believe in guilt, we cannot be a spotless mirror. Earth can reflect heaven or hell, God or the ego. You need but leave the mirror clean and clear of all the images of hidden darkness you have drawn upon it. Right? That is the path with the Course, is to get to that point, to leave the mirror clean. The concern is not with the outcome. The concern is with looking at the spots on the mirror with Jesus, right? We don't have to be concerned about the spotless mirror. That's not our job. Our job is to identify the spots that make our reflection ugly and look at those with Jesus and reevaluate, have Jesus reevaluate it, right? Have Jesus tell us what those spots are. For us, those spots are spots of sin and guilt that we projected outward. For Jesus, those are all calls for love in an unconscious reminder that love is real. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to defend against it so fervently, right? So, but that's Jesus's job. Our job is literally to spot those spots and say, hey, Jesus, look at this. I'm getting upset about this driver in front of me. Please help me look at this. Or, hey, Jesus, I'm afraid of bankruptcy. Look at this with me. Right? Those are all those gods of guilt that we have projected outward. So we're switching from the image of the mirror to the image of, what is it? Clouds, the clouds of guilt, right? He talks about the clouds of guilt in the workbook. He talks about the clouds of guilt in the, I think, obstacles to peace. One of them is in chapter 19, which is obstacles to peace, section 2, chapter 19, section 2. He said, it can indeed be said the ego made its world on sin and guilt, right? So the world the ego has made with us is a world of sin. Only in such a world could everything be upside down. Everything is literally upside down. What is love is hate, right? What is light is dark. And our retina literally gets the image 180 degrees reversed, and our brain has to constantly switch it so that it's upside down, so that we don't get confused, right? So that we stay in the world and be happy in it. This is the strange illusion that makes the clouds of guilt seem heavy and impenetrable. The solidness that is this world's foundation seems to have is found on this. So the solidness of this block that we're in, right, that is includes the exterior world. The exterior world is nothing but our inner world projected outward. So it is part of the block, right? It is us believing that we're sinful and guilty. This guilt is the strange illusion that makes the clouds of guilt seem heavy and impenetrable. Our belief in sin, that we have separated from God, that it's possible to separate from God. The solidness that this world's foundation seems to have is found on this, which is the sin that we believe in, which has as its effect the guilt. So the clouds of guilt seem heavy and impenetrable, right? The light, if I turn the light back on, it's impenetrable. It seems impenetrable against the light. The light is there, right? It's fully there. But it seems to be impenetrable. We cannot penetrate it. And if you're honest with yourself, if we are honest with ourselves, and we could say, and Jesus says, listen, you can decide for Jesus, for the Holy Spirit, for absolute peace right at this very moment. You can do it right now. Why aren't we there? Why aren't we deciding for it, right? Why aren't we letting the light through? And the reason is this guilt. As long as we feel guilty, we cannot let the light shine through us because we believe the light is death. Like in Stephen King's It, right? The death light. That's what light for us is certain death. That's what love is for us. That's what peace is for us. Because we feel so guilty, we project this guilt onto God. We give him the guilt. Now he's the one that's the murderer. And who is he gonna murder? us. So we are extremely terrified of love. So the clouds of guilt seem heavy and impenetrable. And when you've done the course for a while and you started to begin to look at those clouds of guilt a little bit more in detail, a little deeper, you realize how impenetrable it actually seems to be, right? At the very moment when we look at this guilt, it doesn't seem like it's an illusion. It really seems heavy and impenetrable. That's why we need the Holy Spirit and or Jesus, because they don't believe in the guilt because they know separation is impossible. We need their thought system by our side looking at this block of guilt within us. There's one other quote in chapter 13, section 9, that I have quoted many times. It says, "Guilt remains the only thing that hides the Father, for guilt is the attack upon his Son." Guilt remains the only thing that hides the Father. So guilt is the block that keeps this light from shining through into our mind. We're blocking the light from reaching our mind and then the world, right? We're completely blocking it with this guilt. And we're attacking his Son, which means we're attacking ourselves. We're attacking everybody because we project wildly, indiscriminately, 24/7, all the time onto everything, right? What we see outside when we look out the window, we see trees, we see other buildings, we see people. We only see our guilt. Otherwise, we would be in complete peace if we would look out onto the world. We would feel love reflected in waves and waves of love reflected back at us. If we don't feel that, we must be projecting that guilt outward. And that is that heavy seeming barrier, the solidness that this world's foundation seems to have. It seems very heavy and impenetrable. And it is the only thing that stands in between us and the experience of love's presence and God's presence, God's peace. Now it talks about the body with regard to that, because the body is interesting. It is, in a way, I don't know how to put this. I think I talked about it in the obstacles to peace, that because the 4 obstacles go from the outside further inside, right? And the innermost part of the obstacles is the fear of God, right? Then we have the fear of death of the body. And then the first one is that we get rid of peace because we project the guilt onto the others. And then the second one would be is the body in itself. So the body can be, it's really interesting. It can be either this impenetrable thing, or it can be this, right? Where the light shines through and it becomes no longer 100% solid. Because the mind is not in the body is in the mind, right? That's a basic principle of the Course. The mind is not in the body is an outward projection of the mind. So if the mind gets more transparent, to let the love through a little more, the body must become that. And if you've ever been in the presence of Ken Wapnick, it felt like that his body was kind of almost non-existent. It was there, it did its job, it was a tool, but the love came through with very little interference. I felt in the presence of love when he was there, especially not while we talked or something, but afterwards I felt like, whoa, this was just like intense love. So the body can serve the ego and become heavy, and it can serve the Holy Spirit and become light. And Ken talks about this, and I'm sorry I don't have the book here. He talks about this in the absence from felicity, when he includes an excerpt of a conversation between Helen. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I can find it. Helen and Jesus, where they talk about the body being, he compared the body to cobwebs. I'm just not gonna find it now. So basically, Jesus talks about the body becoming like cobwebs, so meaning very, very strong, and wind can go through it and it just kind of swings back and forth, but it's very, very strong material, but very, very light. Right? So the body can become a medium for the right mind, and it becomes lighter in the process. It seems to become heavier. The work is really to look at the guilt that we have projected onto the body and onto the world, but eventually the body, I believe, will become lighter and less in the foreground, more transparent. So he says the body will remain guilt's messenger and will act as it directs, as long as you believe that guilt is real. So as long as we believe guilt is real, the body will stay heavy. Whatever that means for each of us. We have all different kinds of symptoms, different kinds of issues with the body, and there's a heaviness about it. That heaviness is not the body, that heaviness is guilt. So when Jesus says, the body will remain guilt's messenger and will act as it directs, as long as you believe that guilt is real. That's why we need to look at guilt with Jesus, because Jesus is the only one that can say guilt is not real. If we look without Jesus, we will stay in the belief that guilt is real, but we will think we no longer believe in guilt. For the reality of guilt is the illusion that seems to make it heavy and opaque, impenetrable, and a real foundation for the ego's thought system. Its thinness and transparency are not apparent until you see the light behind it. And then you see it as a fragile veil before the light. So the body seen through the Holy Spirit's eyes, through Jesus' eyes, is nothing more than a fragile veil before the light. It is no longer a holder of this deep belief in guilt. If guilt is the one thing that makes this impenetrable, the more we lose that belief in guilt, the more transparent the body becomes. And transparent means it won't block the love from coming through anymore so much. It's a process, right? It doesn't happen overnight. But you can see it in some people. For me, I mean, Ken was one that I saw it in, and another one that I talked about on one of the segments would be Taylor Swift, right? Woohoo, Swiftie. Because I believe that she's also somebody who just lets the light through a little bit more within the costume that is still there. The costume has to be there, otherwise, if it's just somebody sitting there meditating with eyes closed, only a few of us will be able to get that, right? And for me, she has this presence that is less heavy. That's all I can kind of. She is a little bit transparent, of letting the light through a little more, right? And we can feel it in her songs, or when we watch her. Some of us can use her as an example. Other people have others for their example. But for me, it would be one. She would be one of them that identifies a little less with that heavy physical presence. She doesn't have a heavy physical presence. It's more light. So for the reality of guilt is the illusion that seems to make it heavy and opaque, impenetrable, and a real foundation for the ego's thought system. That's the ego's use of the body. Its thinness and transparency are not apparent until you see the light behind it, and then you see it as a fragile veil before the light. So that is the process with the Course, to look at this heavy and opaque, impenetrable, seemingly real foundation, right? This guilt, we must look at the guilt with Jesus, right? He's the one that has the light. He shines on it, and we look at it with him. And that shines it away, and eventually layers and layers and layers and layers get removed, and eventually the light will simply come through until it is no longer needed and the light can just shine by itself. But that's not our concern with this Course. That'll happen eventually. Our concern is always, where's the block? Let me look at the block with Jesus so that I can understand it's not real, right? If I don't look at it, it will stay a reality. Just like the child at night that can't sleep because it thinks there's a monster in the closet, the only way for that child to sleep is for an adult or a big brother or big sister to say, let's look into the closet, right? And they go towards the closet. The closer they come to the closet, the bigger the fear is gonna get, until they open the doors and see there's nothing inside. And then the child can sleep, right? And then Jesus says, when he says, you have not yet gone back far enough, and that is why you become so fearful. When we become fearful of the journey, because we get closer to the closet, right? The more we go into the ego's thought system, the closer we come to the closet, the more we're gonna grip Jesus's hand and say, oh my God, I don't know, you're leading me to this dark place, and I don't know if I can trust you yet, right? And he says, just come with me and trust me, it'll be fine. Because he already knows there's nothing in the closet. Guilt is not real. It's seemingly impenetrable, right? So we have to kind of give him a little slack and say, okay, I'll trust you for the next 2 feet, and then I have to stop again. To regroup, I have to drink some water, I have to kind of, rest. And then we can go another foot. And Jesus says, you have not yet gone far enough, and that is why it becomes so fearful. Our fear will end after it got really, really big, I think, because then we open the closet and we're like, wow, there's nothing in there. It could use a dusting, but there's nothing scary in that closet. We close it and we go to sleep. That's when the peace of God can dawn on us. But he says the fear is there because you haven't gone back far enough. You haven't really opened the doors and looked at it. If you would have, you would have seen the complete, in one sense, transparency of the ego thought system. There's nothing there. We talked about the thorns in the Grimm's fairy tale, Sleeping Beauty, right? Where the prince has to tries to save the princess, but there's this impenetrable ring of thorns. And in the Course's version, the closer you come, and that can only be done with Jesus, is that Jesus says, come on, let's look at those thorns. And we look at them very, very closely. You know, we look at them like they're here, and we're like, oh, okay, I'm going to look at that. And when we look at them, we realize behind it, there's an open space. So we can go through it, right? We can go through those thorns and save the princess. But if we're 100 feet away, we only see this solid block of thorns. And we're like, you know what? I can never penetrate that. And Jesus says, well, come with me. We'll look a little closer. And it's scary, 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 scary until we get very close and we realize, wait a minute. This is all wide open. It just seems impenetrable from a distance, right? The closet seems very scary. Even when you put the hands on the knobs and while you open it, you're going to say, oh my God, I'm going to die. And you open it and there's nothing there. And that is the process with the Course. It becomes a fragile veil before the light. That door no longer has any meaning. The closet is empty. The child can go back to sleep and we can awaken to the peace of God, right? Because the only block that keeps us from our Father, as Jesus says, guilt remains the only thing that hides the Father. If this is no longer there, the Father is no longer hidden. And what actually happens is when we open the closet door, this intense light of love will come out. And because we don't have the fear anymore, we will just leap back into the arms of God. And then he says in actually workbook lesson 159, paragraph 5, it says, Christ's vision is the bridge between the worlds. And in its power can you safely trust to carry you from this world into one made holy by forgiveness. So the process of getting there is forgiveness. And forgiveness is looking at the block with Jesus. That's the only definition of forgiveness. It merely looks and waits and judges not. Right? It looks and it waits because there's nothing to do. Things which seem quite solid here are merely shadows there, transparent, faintly seen, at times forgot, and never able to obscure the light that shines beyond them. Holiness has been restored to vision, and the blind can see. So things which seem quite solid here, which is guilt, are merely shadows there. So once we're with Jesus in our right mind, it's not like we're going to disappear, right? Ken always said, you're not going to disappear into the oneness of heaven. We're not there yet. What will disappear over time is the guilt, that heaviness in the world, that heaviness in our body, the heaviness in our psyche, that will disappear. And if guilt seems very solid here, it is merely shadows there. So we might experience a shadow of a guilt, of a distant guilt, but we won't fully believe it anymore, right? It'll just pass us by and we're just going to walk straight through it with Jesus. At times forgot, we might forget the body completely. right? We're only reminded of the body because we think it's heavy. With the heaviness is not in the body, the heaviness is in the mind that believes that we're guilty. That is the heaviness we experience. Right? Things which seem quite solid here in the ego thought system are merely shadows there, transparent, faintly seen, at times forgot, and never able to obscure the light that shines beyond them. So we will still we still feel the body, we still work, we still do things in the world, we get groceries, we wash dishes, whatever it is, right? But slowly but surely, that impenetrableness will change into transparency. And transparency by definition means lighter. We will feel lighter. But in order to get there, we must look at the very, very heavy, opaque, seemingly solid foundation of the ego thought system, which is our belief in sin and guilt. Then there is one in chapter 18, which is chapter 18, section 9. It says, we're going back to the clouds. It says, this heavy seeming barrier, this artificial floor that looks like rock, is like a bank of low dark clouds that seem to be a solid wall before the sun. The clouds of guilt seem to be a solid wall before the sun. This guilt seems to be a solid wall before the light within us. Impenetrable, right? Its impenetrable appearance is wholly an illusion. And that illusion can only be seen by us when we look at it. If we believe we're not guilty, the guilt will stay. It will stay, it will block the light. We will be part of the block, and we will not have peace. We might have a peace that the ego makes up for us, which is within this block of guilt. We might experience a little bit of respite. That is not the peace that Jesus wants for us. Its impenetrable appearance is wholly an illusion. It gives way softly to the mountain tops that rise above it and has no power at all to hold back anyone willing to climb above it and see the sun. And to climb above it means, when you're going back to our example of the clouds, so if we're here, right, we're here and we're climbing up the mountain, this is the cloud of guilt that we eventually will have to pass through in order to get to the top and realize this is what the reality is, right? Not the clouds. The clouds are not real, but we have to go through it, go to the top, and then we can realize it's an illusion. While we walk through it, we realize it's an illusion. So it gives way softly to the mountaintops that rise above it and has no power at all to hold back anyone willing to climb above it and see the sun. It is not strong enough to stop a button's fall, nor hold a feather. Nothing can rest upon it, for it is but an illusion of a foundation. Try but to touch it, and it disappears. Attempt to grasp it, and your hands hold nothing. And this is the process of the Course. In this sentence, in one way, we have to approach that block with Jesus, and we have to try to touch it. We have to try to touch that guilt, go into that guilt, stay with it for a little bit, try to touch it and say, what is it, Jesus? Try to touch it and it disappears. Attempt to grasp it and your hands hold nothing. But if we don't try to touch it, if we don't attempt to grasp it, if we stay away from it, we will not realize that it is nothing. That while the doors of the closet are closed, we will be afraid. And that fear expresses itself into thousands of, in thousands and different kinds of emotions and thoughts. It all boils down to that fear of opening the closet and looking at this monster in it that isn't a monster, but we cannot see that it's not a monster until we approach it and open it. Until we look at the ego thought system in detail with Jesus, we will not believe that it's not there. We will believe it's there. Otherwise, why wouldn't we go and look at it? Then he says in the workbook lesson 69, as an exercise, he says, very quietly now, with your eyes closed, try to let go of all the content that generally occupies your consciousness. Think of your mind as a vast circle, surrounded by a layer of heavy, dark clouds. You can see only the clouds because you seem to be standing outside the circle and quite apart from it. From where you stand, you can see no reason to believe there's a brilliant light hidden by the clouds. The clouds seem to be the only reality. They seem to be all there is to see. Therefore, you do not attempt to go through them and past them, which is the only way in which you would be really convinced of their lack of substance. We will make this attempt today. So the only way for us to lose our belief in guilt is to look at it with Jesus and smile at it. Look at Jesus when we look at the guilt and he smiles at it. He says, it's nothing. And we eventually will realize, you know what, it's true. But we can't do that until we look at it. They seem to be all there is to see. This guilt, for a while, seems to be all there is to see. Therefore, you do not attempt to go through it and past it, which is the only way in which you would be really convinced of their lack of substance. There's no shortcut, right? Our belief is so strong. Jesus must convince us that the guilt that we have lived by for millennia, if we go in linear time, it is so heavy and we always push it away. We don't want to come in contact with it. That's why we project it outward. And Jesus says, all right, let's start the process of reversing, right? Up the ladder, separation led us down, and we approach it. The Course approaches guilt. It's not like moving it away. Jesus says we go through the guilt, right? We go through the clouds to the top of the mountain, and there you will see that the whole thing was made up. But you can't see that it was made up if we're down here and say, I'm not going to go up there. I'm not going to look at my guilt. And that's not what the Course says anyway, right? He doesn't talk about guilt. He talks about love. So I'm going to be down here. I'm going to concentrate on love. But the sun, I'm starting to draw stuff here. Right? The sun is at the top. There is no sun down here because the clouds, the guilt, seem impenetrable. So we must go through the clouds and voila, Now we're in the sun, and now we realize the clouds are nothing. Right? The vista is vast. We have this vast vista of love that we see when we're on the top of the mountain. And Jesus is the guide that leads us up the mountain. Right? If you're a visual person, you can put some clothes on him. You say, okay, he's got hiking boots, he's got those socks that go all the way to the knees. If you're a German, he might have lederhosen, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. If he's your guide through those clouds, we can make him as personal as possible. There's nothing abstract about it. It's a very personal journey to go through those clouds. Right? And we go through them and we realize I'm really, really afraid. And Jesus says, I know. We'll just keep going until we come to the other side of the clouds. Until then, you will be afraid. Sorry, Winston Churchill, right? You might know the quote. Winston Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going. Don't sit down. I'm saying that. He said, if you're going through hell, keep going. If you're going through those clouds, which whenever you're not at peace and you know it, and you're like, oh my God, I'm doing this course for 10 years and I'm still in this rut. You're going through the clouds of guilt. Take Jesus by the hand and say, let's do it. We'll go a little further. We'll look at another aspect of the ego thought system. If you're going through hell, you cannot sit down and say, you know what? I'm not going to use this course anymore. It's too hard. I want to go back down. I want to take the red pill again. I don't want to take the blue pill. The blue pill was reality. I don't want that. I don't want to go through here. I want to stay down here. I want to make a nice little cabin on a lake with a little waterfall. Maybe another person, so I'm not alone. I'll get some sheeps and goat. I can be off grid. I can have a nice life down here. I see the sunset over the mountains. But this is still the belief in guilt, and it will not satisfy the Son of God, because the Son of God comes from here. He cannot be satisfied below the clouds. Only the ego can say, you will be satisfied down here. Don't go up the mountain. We'll make a nice life down here. And the guilt up here will keep that far away from us on the outside world. We'll keep it in Israel, in Gaza. We'll keep it in Ukraine, in Russia. We'll keep it in other people, in political figures. We'll have our little carved out spot right here where we can be happy below the clouds. I know it's a little dreary. And it rains a lot. And it gets cold and windy and muddy. But it's better than taking up that hiking staff, taking Jesus and say, let's go. I'm going to go through those clouds now. And he says, okay, I brought some protein bars. I brought some handkerchiefs, if you need to wash your hands. If you have blisters on your feet, I have Band-Aids. I've got a whole backpack of items for you, and I'm going to carry it. All you need to do is walk through the clouds with me. And then in the clouds, we look at the formations, like, oh, look, a deformed body. Looks like a deformed body, or looks like somebody's sick, or looks like somebody has lost their money, or I have lost my house, or I have lost my partner. And look at all those cloud formations. And we think it real, and Jesus says, I know they look real, but they're not real because they're made from a material that is all but an illusion, and that material is guilt. And while we go through the cloud of guilt, I will tell you that you're the beloved son of a loving father. But you will not believe me when we're down below in the little cabin. My course only works and is intended to work here. This is where the course is being applied, not down here. In the cloud of guilt, in that from the child's bed to the closet, that is the part where we have to walk through with him. That is here, and that is the course's process, not down here, not up here. Once we're through the clouds, the course's job is done, because guilt is the only thing that hides the Father. Once we're through the clouds of guilt, the course has lost its purpose, and nothing survives its purpose, as the course says. We don't need Jesus anymore. We don't need the course anymore. Nothing. Once we're through the clouds of guilt, Jesus as a teacher has fulfilled his purpose. He's no longer needed, but he is needed while we're down here and realizing, you know what, I got to get through here to get up there. I need you, buddy. And he says, I'm there, I'm walking with you. I've got everything for you, all the supplies you need to get through here. We have a really nice tent. We can play cards. You know, when we're inside the tent and it gets really stormy outside, we'll have the light on. Right? But we'll walk through those clouds together. And we come out on the other side, I guarantee you, because the clouds are nothing. All we need to do is switch that belief in that guilt, and in order to do that, we must go through them. So if you're going through hell, keep going. And then we'll go to the second meaning of the word transparency. Wow, it's already an hour. So the second meaning of transparent, becoming transparent, is the solution. We become transparent with Jesus, right? We don't hide anything anymore from him. We lay our mind, our thoughts, our weird wishes, or our wish to throw our brother in the precipice, as Jesus says. All those things, we look at it with him. We become transparent with regard to our mind with him. We bring to him all of our belief in guilt. He does not need our belief in love. He says, forget about that. I don't care about that. Don't give me that. I don't need your love. I have a lot of love in myself, Jesus says. He says, I don't need yours, but I need your unwillingness. I need your fear. I need that guilt of yours that you give to everybody else. I need your resistance. I need your awareness of that resistance. That's what I need. And that you can look at with me, right? He doesn't need us to tell him I love you and whatever. He says that's fine, but it's not true. You can't love me down here, because everything below the clouds is all guilt. You can love me up here. I know you love me because love cannot be divided. So don't tell me about love. Just tell me about the obstacles to love. That's all I care about. Tell me about your fears and everything that bothers you. And we'll trace it back to your own decision for guilt and sin, and that way we'll go through the clouds of guilt. And Jesus says, watch carefully and see what it is you are really asking for. Be very honest with yourself in this, for we must hide nothing from each other. If you will try to do this, you have taken the first step toward preparing your mind for the Holy One to enter, right? If we signal to Jesus, say, listen, I want to look at the ego thought system, it's not going to get better. Why should it get better? We're on the way through the guilt. It has to get darker. We're like, I can't see anything. It's so dark. Jesus says, I have the light, hold my hand, I'll lead you through it. If you will really try to do this, you have taken the first step toward preparing your mind for the Holy One to enter. We will prepare for this together. For once he has come, you will be ready to help me make other minds ready for him. Making other minds ready for him, there literally is nothing to do for us, right? Other than becoming transparent. If our mind becomes transparent, we become that sunlight for other people, right? We become that guide that can lead others through it. We can become that guide while we're still in the clouds. We don't have to be perfect to become a guiding light for others. We're in the clouds with Jesus, and somebody else is over there lost. We say, hey, come over here. We'll go with you. And then he says in chapter 11, section 5, he says, no one can escape from illusions unless he looks at them, for not looking is the way they are protected. There's no need to shrink from illusions, for they cannot be dangerous. We are ready to look more closely at the ego's thought system, because together we have the lamp that will dispel it. And since you realize that you do not want it, you must be ready. Let us be very calm in doing this, for we are merely looking honestly for truth. The dynamics of the ego will be our lesson for a while, for we must look first at this to see beyond it, since you have made it real. Because we have made those clouds real and impenetrable. We made those clouds impenetrable. For we must look first at this to see beyond it. Very, very clear. In the last paragraph, in which we will close, Jesus says, your guilty secret is nothing. The guilty secret is that what we hide from him, right? Our murderous thoughts, our way of manipulating others or being selfish with others. All that is part of the ego thought system. And he says, your guilty secret is nothing, and if you will but bring it to the light will dispel it. And then no dark cloud will remain between you and the remembrance of your Father. The only thing that blocks this remembrance from our Father is guilt, right? No dark cloud of guilt will remain between you and the remembrance of your Father, for you will remember his guiltless Son, who did not die because he is immortal. Up here, we realize everybody is the Son of God, and everybody is an immortal part of that eternal love that cannot be changed, right? Up there. And you will see that you were redeemed with him and have never been separated from him. In this understanding lies your remembering, for it is the recognition of love without fear, of love without guilt. There will be great joy in heaven on your homecoming. Where is it? Yeah, there will be great joy in heaven on your homecoming, and the joy will be yours. For the redeemed Son of Man is the guiltless Son of God, and to recognize him is your redemption. To recognize him means to see the Christ, the light of Christ in our brother, which is the light that shines in others, is the same light that shines in us. And if we remove the blocks within ourselves, we have also removed the blocks in the other, and we will see the light shining from us to the other person, reflected back by that same light to us. But we don't have to worry about the light, right? We only have to worry about looking at the guilt with Jesus and have that whole block of opaque dark material become less and less solid and become more and more transparent until it's just a thin veil and the light shines right through from us into the world. Thanks for watching.